chapters 1 through 5 of the Book of Ezra. Chapter 1. In the first year of Koresh, king of Persia, the promise of the ever-living through the mouth of Jeremiah was fulfilled by the ever-living, exciting the mind of Koresh, king of the Persians. He consequently published a proclamation to all his empire, and also recorded it to say, Koresh, the king of the Persians, commands thus, to all kingdoms of the empire which the ever-living God of the heavens gave to me, who has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judea. Whoever of all his people is with you, may God be with him. So let him go up to Jerusalem that is in Judea, and build the temple of the ever-living God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And let all the residents in any place where they are lodged assist those persons in that place with silver and gold, and provisions and cattle, and with offerings for the temple of the God who is in Jerusalem. Then the heads of the families of Judah and Benjamin arose, with the priests and Levites, and all whose spirit God had excited to go up to build the temple of the ever-living which is in Jerusalem, and all around encouraged them by giving articles of silver and gold, and provisions, and cattle, and jewels, beside the free will offerings. And King Koresh brought out the vessels of the temple of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought from Jerusalem, and put into the temple of his God. Those Koresh king of the Persians brought out under the care of Mithredath the treasurer, who counted them to Shashbazzar the governor of Judea. And this was their number: 30 basins of gold, 1,000 basins of silver, 29 knives, 30 cups of gold, next 410 cups of silver, and of other vessels 1,000. All the vessels of gold and silver were 5,400. The whole of them were carried by Shashbazzar with the returning transports from Babel to Jerusalem. Chapter 2. And these are the sons of the royal family who returned from the captives of the transportation, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babel, transported to Babel, who returned to Jerusalem and Judea, each to his own village, who came with Zerubbabel, Joshua, Nehemiah, Seraiah, Reliah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mispar, Bigvai, Rehum, Baanah. From the records of the men of Israel. Of the Beni Parosh, 2,172. Of the Beni Shaphatiah, 372. Of the Beni Ara, 775. Of the Beni Pathath, of the Beni Jeshua and Joab, 2,812. Of the Beni Elam, 1,254. Of the Beni Zathai, 945. Of the Beni Zakkai, 760. Of the Beni Bani, 642. Of the Beni Babai, 623. Of the Beni Azgad, 1,222. Of the Beni Adonikam, 666. Of the Beni Bigvai, 2,056. Of the Beni Adin, 254. Of the Beni Attar of Hezekiah, 98. Of the Beni Bezai, 323. Of the Beni Jorah, 112. Of the Beni Hasham, 223. Of the Beni Gibar, 95. Of the Beni Bethlehem, 123. Of the men of Netophah, 56. Of the men of Anathoth, 128. Of the Beni Asmaveth, 42. Of the Beni Kiriath Arim, Kephirah, and Beeroth, 743. Of the Beni Ramah and Geba, 627. Of the men of Mikas, 122. Of the men of Bethel and Ai, 223. Of the Beni Nebo, 53. Of the Beni Magbish, 156. Of the Beni Elam, 1,254. Of the Beni Harim, 320. Of the Beni Lod, Hadad, and Ono, 725. Of the Beni Jericho, 345. Of the Beni Senah, 3,630. The priests. Of the Beni Jedaiah of the house of Joshua, 973. Of the Beni Immer, 1,052. Of the Beni Pashur, 1,247. Of the Beni Harim, 1,017. The Levites. Of the Beni Jeshua and Kadmiel, of the Beni Hodirah, 75. The singers. Of the Beni Asaph, 128. The sons of the porters. Of the Beni Shalom, the Beni Attar, the Beni Talman, the Beni Akub, the Beni Hatita, the Beni Shobal, in all 139. The attendants. Of the Beni Zikah, the Beni Hasupha, the Beni Pebaoth, the Beni Keros, the Beni Siha, the Beni Padan, the Beni Libana, the Beni Hagabah, the Beni Akub, the Beni Hagab, the Beni Shamlai, the Beni Hanan, the Beni Gidel, the Beni Gahar, the Beni Raiha, the Beni Rezin, the Beni Nekoda, the Beni Gazam, the Beni Azza, the Beni Pask, the Beni Besai, the Beni Asna, the Beni Meonim, the Beni Nephisim, the Beni Bakuk, the Beni Hakupha, the Beni Harkhur, the Beni Bazluth, the Beni Mekida, the Beni Harsha, the Beni Barkos, the Beni Sisera, the Beni Tema, the Beni Nezik, the Beni Hatifa. The sons of Solomon's servants. The Beni Sotia, the Beni Sopherath, the Beni Peruda, the Beni Jala, the Beni Darkon, the Beni Gidel, the Shiphitiah, the Beni Hatil, the Beni Pokereth Nazabaim, the Beni Ammi. All the attendants and the children of Solomon's servants were 392. The following also went up from Tel Milah, Tel Harsha, Kerub, Adon, and Immer, but they could not show their ancestral houses or their race, whether they were of Israel. Of the Beni Delaiah, the Beni Tobiah, the Beni Nekoda, 652. And of the children of the priests, the Beni Habiah, the Beni Barzillai, who took as a wife one of the daughters of Barzillai the Gileadite, and so was called by his name. These sought their register with those enumerated by their genealogy, but were unable to find it. They were therefore degraded from the priesthood, and the governor commanded them not to eat of the most holy offerings until a priest arose with Urim and Thummim. The whole caravan inclusive was 40,360, beside their men and women servants, who were 7,337, with 200 singing men and women, 760 horsemen, 245 mules, 435 camels, 6,720 asses. And some of the heads of ancestries, on their arrival at the house of the ever-living in Jerusalem, offered gifts to the temple of God to erect it upon its foundations. They gave, according to their power, to the treasury of the works 60,000 derricks of gold, and 5,000 pounds weight of silver, and 100 priests' robes. Thus the priests and the Levites, and some of the people, and the singers, and the gatekeepers, and the attendants returned, with many of Israel, to their villages. Chapter 3. And on the arrival of the 7th month, after the children of Israel had reached their towns, the people assembled like one man at Jerusalem. Then Jeshua ben Jozadak arose with his brother priests, and Zerubbabel ben Shaltiel and his brothers, and built an altar to the God of Israel, to offer burnt offerings upon, in accordance with the record in the law of Moses, the man of God. And they built the altar on its own foundation, although fear was upon them from the people of the countries, and offered burnt offerings on it to the ever-living at the morning and evening. They also made the Feast of Tabernacles, according to the records, and offerings day by day in number as the decree commands, day by day. After that, for the perpetual offerings, and the new moons, and all the holy festivals of the ever-living, and for every one who offered a free will to the ever-living, they began from the first day of the 7th month to offer burnt offerings to the ever-living, although the foundation of the temple of the ever-living was not yet laid. They also gave money to the stone-cutters and carpenters, and food and drink to the Zidonians and the Tsurites, to bring cedar wood from Lebanon by sea to Joppa, in accordance with the grant of Koresh, king of the Persians, to them. And in the 2nd year of their arrival at the house of God in Jerusalem, in the 2nd month, Zerubbabel ben Shealtiel, and Jeshua ben Jozadak, and the rest of their friends, the priests and Levites, and all who had come from the captivity to Jerusalem, and they appointed the Levites from 20 years of age and upwards to superintend the work at the house of the ever-living. He then appointed Joshua his son, and his friend Kadmiel, and his son, sons of Hodaviah, to superintend together the execution of the works at the house of the ever-living God, with the sons of Henadad, and their sons and relatives, the Levites. When they laid the foundations of the buildings of the temple of the ever-living, the priests stood robed and with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, to praise the ever-living, according to the arrangement of David, king of Israel, and responded, "Praise and thank the life, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever to Israel." Then all the people cheered with a great cheer to praise the ever-living at the laying of the foundation of the house of the Lord. But many of the old priests and Levites and heads of houses who had seen the former house, and the foundation of this house before their eyes, wept with a loud voice, but many cheered for joy at the top of their voice. So none of the people could distinguish the sound of the cheering from the sound of the weeping of the people. For the people cheered with a great cheering, and the sound was heard afar. Chapter 4. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the sons of the transports were building a temple to the ever-living God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of houses, and said to them, "We will build with you, for we follow your God like yourselves. But we have not sacrificed from the days of Esarhaddon, king of Ashur, who brought us up here." But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the heads of the houses of Israel replied, "You shall not, but we will build the house of our God, for we alone can build for the ever-living God of Israel, as King Koresh, king of the Persians, commanded us." The people of the countries therefore impeded the plans of the people of Judah, and interfered with them in building, and hired persons against them, and conspired to break their intention, all the time of Koresh, king of the Persians, and up to the period of Darius, the king of the Persians. Afterwards, in the reign of Achashverosh, they wrote to accuse the inhabitants of Judea and Jerusalem. And again, in the times of Artaxshasta, in a time of peace, Mithridath, Tabal, and the rest of their companions wrote to Artaxshasta, king of Persia, and the wording of their letter was in Aramaic, and I copy it from the Aramaic. Rehum, master of the rolls, and Shimshai the secretary wrote a letter in conjunction against Jerusalem to the king Artaxerxes in this form. Rehum, the master of the rolls, and Shimshai the secretary, and their associates of the Dania and Aphrastachia, Tarphlia, Aphrasia, Erker, Babaliah, Shushankiah, Dahriah, Almia, and the rest of the peoples whom the great and beloved Asnapper brought over to his city of Shemaron, with others over the river. This is copied from the letter they sent to King Artaxerxes. Your servants of the men over the river, and others, inform the king himself of the Jews who ascended from you to us at Jerusalem, and who are building the rebellious and bad city, and have finished the walls, and they are joining them. However, it should be made known to the king that if this city is rebuilt, and its walls are completed, they will not pay tribute, tax, or toll, and then the king will suffer. Consequently, because we eat of the salt of the palace, we have advised the king, for it is not right for us to look at such dishonor, and we have sent to inform the king, so that the books of records of your fathers may be searched, when you will find in the book of records that this city is a rebellious town, and dangerous to kings and governors, and exerted itself to excite disturbance in former times. And for that reason this city was burnt down. We wish therefore to advise the king that if this city should be rebuilt and its walls completed, you will have no province over the river in consequence. The king replied by a letter. To Rehum, the master of the rolls, and Shimshai the secretary, and the rest of their associates, who reside in Shemaron and the district beyond the river, health and the rest. The letter you sent to us has been openly read before us, so I signed an order, and they searched, and have found that this city from former times has risen against the kings, and rebelled, and excited sedition in itself, and that powerful kings have existed in Jerusalem, and governed all beyond the river, and tribute, tax, and toll were paid to them. Consequently, you must make a decree to restrain these men, and that this city must not be rebuilt until I shall sign a decree. And learn not to be slow to execute this. Why should the royal affairs be endangered? When the copy of the letter of King Artaxerxes was read before Rehum, and Shimshai the secretary and their associates, they at once proceeded to Jerusalem against the Jews, and prevented them by force of an army. Thus the work at the house of God in Jerusalem was stopped until the 3rd year of the reign of Darius, king of the Persians. Chapter 5. Then the preachers Haggai and Zechariah ben Adnah preached to the Jews who were in Jerusalem with the power of the God of Israel upon them. Consequently, Zerubbabel bar Shealtiel and Jeshua bar Jozadak began again to rebuild the house of God at Jerusalem, and the preachers of God helped them. Then Tatnai, the governor of the over river, and Shathar-Boznai and their associates sent and inquired of them, Who gave you permission to rebuild this temple and to close up this wall? They also continued to ask them, What are the names of the men who are erecting this building? However, the eye of God was upon the leaders of the Jews, and they did not prevent them until a despatch could be sent to Darius, and a reply received about it. A copy of the letter that Tatnai, the over-river governor, and Shethar-Boznai and their associates, the Aphraskia, who were over the river, sent to the king Darius. They sent a letter to him written in this form. To Darius the king, perfect health. It should be known to the king that on our going to the province of the Jews, to the temple of the great God, we found it rebuilt with great stones, with timber fixed in the walls, and the work is being pushed forward, and the works prosper in their hands. We consequently asked the leaders, Who gave you a decree for this temple, to build it and close in the walls? We also demanded the names of their leaders, so as to inform you of the names of those men. When they returned us this answer, We are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and we are rebuilding the temple that was formerly here many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and furnished. But because our ancestors provoked the God of heaven, he gave them to the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babel, the Chaldea, and he overthrew that temple and transported the people to Babel. But in the first year of Koresh, king of Babel, King Koresh signed a decree for this temple to be rebuilt, and also the gold and silver furniture of the temple of God, which Nebuchadnezzar transferred from the temple of Jerusalem and carried to the temple of Babel. King Koresh transferred from the temple of Babel and delivered to Shashbazzar, who was appointed governor there, and said to him, "Take this furniture and carry it to the temple of Jerusalem, and rebuild the house of God on its own foundations." Shashbazzar consequently came and laid the foundations of the house of God at Jerusalem, and from that time until now it has been building and is not completed. Consequently, therefore, if it pleases the king, let there be a search at the royal treasury at Babel, to ascertain if King Koresh did sign a decree for the rebuilding of this house of God in Jerusalem, and let the king send us information about this affair. The end of chapters 1 through 5 of the Book of Ezra. Recording by Mark Penfold. Chapter 6. King Darius consequently signed an order, and they searched in the record office of the treasury where the archives were kept in Babel, and found at Achmetha, the capital of the government of Media, a roll, on which was written round the records. In the first year of Koresh the king, King Koresh signs a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let a house be built for the sacrificing of sacrifices, and let the foundations be constructed in length 60 cubits, and 60 cubits broad. Let it be built of 3 courses of great stones, and a course of timber, and let the cost be paid from the royal palace. And also let the gold and silver furniture of the house of God, that Nebuchadnezzar removed from the temple of Jerusalem and carried to Babel, be restored, and taken to the temple in Jerusalem, and put in its proper place in the house of God. Consequently, Tattenai, governor of the Over River, Shatharboznai, and your associates, the Apharaskia of the Over River, must refrain from interference. Let the works at the house of God be done. Let the governor of the Jews and the leaders of the Jews construct the house of God upon its site. And I further sign this decree as to what you shall provide for these leaders of the Jews who are building this house of God, that there shall be paid from the royal treasuries, from the taxes of the Over River, the expenses that may be incurred by these men, and without delay, and whatever is needed, whether of young bullocks and rams and lambs, to offer to the God of the heavens, wheat, salt, wine, oil, as demanded by the priests in Jerusalem, you shall give to them day by day, of which fail not, for them to present perfumes to the God of the heavens, and to pray for the life of the king and his children. And I sign a decree that every person who may alter this letter, a beam shall be taken from his house, and he shall be nailed upright upon it, and his house be made a dunghill for it. And may the God who dwells there confound and overthrow every king and people who extends his hand to alter or injure the house of God that is in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have confirmed this decree. Let it be executed at once. Therefore Tattenai, the governor of the Over River, Shatharboznai, and their associates, because of what King Darius had sent them in the above, acted at once. And the leaders of the Jews built, and prospered through the preaching of the preachers Haggai and Zechariah bar Adoah. So they built and completed, according to the order of the God of Israel, and the decrees of Koresh and Darius and Artaxshasta, the kings of the Persians. So the temple was finished on the 3rd day of the month Adar, in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius, when the children of Israel, with the priests and Levites, and the rest of the sons of the transports, celebrated the dedication of the house of God with delight. At this dedication they offered in the house of God 100 bullocks, 200 rams, 400 lambs. and for a sin offering for all Israel 12 he-goats, for the number of the tribes of Israel. They also appointed the divisions of the priests and the courses of the Levites for the service of God at Jerusalem, as written in the book of Moses. Then the sons of the transports made the Passover on the 14th of the first month, for the priests and Levites had purified themselves together. All of them were purified. So they slew the Passover for all the sons of the transports, both for their brothers the priests, and for themselves, and all the children of Israel ate it, those who had returned from the transportation, and all who were purified from the defilement of the heathen land, who had come to seek the ever-living God of Israel. So they made the feast of unfermented bread for 7 days with joy, for the Lord had gladdened them, and softened the heart of the king of Ashur towards them, to strengthen their hands in the works at the house of the God of Israel. Chapter 7. And after these affairs, in the reign of Artaxerxes king of Persia, Ezra ben Seraiah, ben Azariah, ben Hilkiah, ben Shalom, ben Zadok, ben Ahitub, ben Amariah, ben Azariah, ben Merioth, ben Zerekiah, ben Uzai, ben Bukai, ben Abishua, ben Phinehas, ben Eleazar, ben Aaron, the high priest. He, Ezra, went up from Babel. He was well accomplished in the laws of Moses, that the Lord, the God of Israel, gave. The king also endowed him, on account of the power of the ever-living God upon him, with all that he requested from him. There also went up some of the children of Israel, and some priests and Levites, and singers and attendants, to Jerusalem, in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes, who arrived at Jerusalem in the 5th month of the 7th year of the king. For on the 1st of the first month the ascent from Babel was commanded, and in the 1st of the 5th month he arrived at Jerusalem, by the good help of his God to him. For Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord, and to practice and teach its institutions and decrees of Israel. Now this is a copy of the letter which King Artaxerxes gave to Ezra the priest, the accomplished in the commands of the ever-living, and his institutions to Israel. Artaxerxes, the king of kings, to Ezra the priest, the accomplished in the writings of the beneficent and perfect God of the heavens. I have signed a decree that all the people of Israel in my empire, with their priests and Levites, who wish to go with you to Jerusalem, may go. Because you are sent from the presence of the king and his 7 counselors, to inquire about Judea and Jerusalem, with the law of your God in your hand, and to carry the silver and gold given by the king and his counselors to the God of Israel who dwells in Jerusalem. Also all the silver and gold that you have collected in all the provinces of Babel, with the free will offerings of your people, and the priests who present freely to the house of their God in Jerusalem. On this account you shall purchase diligently with that money oxen, rams, lambs, and their food and drink offerings, and offer them upon the altar of your God at Jerusalem. And you may do with the remainder of the silver and gold what seems best in the opinion of yourself and your friends for your God. And also the furniture that is given to you to place in the house, offer them as a present to God in Jerusalem. But whatever besides may be needful for the house of your God, that it occurs to you to present, provide for it from the royal treasury. And I myself, Artaxerxes the king, sign this decree to all the treasurers of the over river, that whatever Ezra the priest, the accomplished in the law of the God of the heavens, demands of you, you shall immediately execute it, to the amount of 100 talents of silver, and to 100 cors of wheat, and to 100 baths of wine, and 100 baths of oil, and of salt without noting. All that is commanded by the God of the heavens, let it be done quickly for the house of the God of the heavens. For why should there be anger against the dominions of the king and his children? And we notify you that regarding all the priests, Levites, singers, doorkeepers, attendants or servants of this house of God, it is not allowed to impose upon them tribute, tax, or toll. And you, Ezra, according to the science of your God that you possess, appoint judges and magistrates, who can administer justice to all the people of the over river. All should understand the law of your God, and if they do not know it, teach them. But whoever will not practice the laws of your God and the laws of the king, let swift justice be done on him at once, whatever results, whether death, or uprooting, or fining, or imprisonment. I thanked the Lord God of our fathers, who put such things into the heart of the king, to adorn the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, and who has extended mercy to me before the king and his counselors, and all the great generals of the king. Thus I was bold, because the hand of the Lord God was with me, and I collected some of the heads of my people to ascend with me. Chapter 8. And these are the heads of families and the genealogies of those who went up with me from Babel in the reign of Artaxerxes the king. From the Beni Phinehas, Gershom. Of the Beni Ithamar, Daniel. Of the Beni David, Hattush. Of the Beni Shechaniah with the Beni Tarash, Zechariah, and with them of the lineage of their ancestors, 150. Of the Beni Phakath Moab, Eliwanai ben Zarchiah, and with him 200 men. Of the Beni Shechaniah ben Joxiel, and with him 300 men. And from the Beni Adinabed ben Jonathan, and with him 500 of the gentry. And from the Beni Elam, Jeshiah ben Athaliah, and with him 70 men. And from the Beni Shephatiah, Zebediah ben Michal, and with him 80 men. From the Beni Joab, Abadiah ben Jachiel, and with him 218 men. And from the Beni Shelomith ben Josephiah, and with him 160 men. And from the Beni Babai, Zechariah ben Babai, and with him 28 men. And from the Beni Azgad, Jochanan ben Habatnan, and with him 110 men. And from the Beni Adonikam, the dawdler, the names are Eliphalet, Javal, and Shemaiah, and with them 60 men. And from the Beni Bigvai, Authai and Zabud, and with them 70 men. I collected them at the river that goes by Ahava, and encamped there 3 days, where I reviewed the people and the priests, and discovered there were none from the Beni Levi there. I consequently sent to Eleazar, and Ariel, and Shemaiah, and Alnathan, and Jarib, and to Alnathan, and to Nathan, and Zechariah, and to Meshullam, their chiefs, and to Joiarib, and to Alnathan, the teachers, and dispatched them to Addo the chief in the district of Cassiphia, and put a message in their mouths to transmit to Addo and the attendants their relatives in the district of Cassiphia to send to us guardians of the house of our God. And they sent to us, by the good hand of our God being with us, intelligent men from the Beni Machli, ben Levi, ben Israel, and Sharbiah and 18 of his sons and brothers, with Hashabiah and Jeshiah from the Beni Merari, with 20 of his brothers and sons. And from the attendants who were appointed by David, and his officers to serve the Levites as attendants, 220, all of them properly catalogued. I then proclaimed a fast at the river by Ahava, to humble ourselves before our God, to seek from him a safe journey for ourselves, our children, and all our baggage. For I was ashamed to ask the king for an army and cavalry to guard us from enemies on the road, because we had said to the king, the power of our God was with all who seek him to benefit them, but his power and anger upon all who forsake him. We consequently fasted and entreated from our God about this, and he was ready with us. I next selected 12 from the chief priests, that is, Sherebiah and Hashabiah, and 10 of their companions with them, and weighed the silver and gold to them, as well as the vessels presented to the house of God, the presents of the king and his counselors, and his generals, and the subscriptions of all Israel. I there weighed into their custody 600 talents of silver, and 150 talents of silver vessels, and 100 talents of gold. beside 20 bulls of gold of 1,000 darics, and 2 vessels of best bronze gold, as valuable as gold. I then said to them, You are consecrated to the Lord, and the sacred vessels, and the silver and gold are presented to the ever-living God of your fathers. So guard and preserve them until you weigh them to the chief priests and Levites and the chiefs of the families of Israel at Jerusalem, who will bring them to the house of our God. The priests and Levites then accepted the silver and gold and the vessels to carry to Jerusalem to the house of our God. We afterwards marched from the river by Ahava on the 12th of the first month, and the hand of God was with us, and protected us from the hand of any enemy or robber on the journey. Thus we arrived at Jerusalem, and rested for 3 days, and on the 4th day the silver, gold, and vessels for the house of our God were weighed by the hand of Meremoth ben Adria the priest, and with him were Eleazar ben Phinehas, and with them Jozabad ben Ishua, and Noadiah ben Bigvai the Levite. The whole were by number and weight, and the whole weight was recorded at the time. The sons of the transportation who had come from captivity then offered burnt offerings to the God of Israel: 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 lambs, and 12 he-goats as a sin offering. The whole were a burnt offering to the Lord. They afterwards delivered the decrees of the king to the royal governors and administrators of the over river, and they assisted the people and the house of God. Chapter 9. When all this was done, the chiefs approached me and said, The people of Israel have not separated themselves, or the priests and Levites, from the populations of the countries with their abominations, that is, of the Canaanites, the Kittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Mizraim, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters for themselves, and their sons have corrupted their sacred race with the peoples of the countries, and the hand of the nobles and gentry has been the first in this sin. When I heard this report, I tore off my robes and cloak, and pulled the hair off my head and beard, and sat down in consternation. And all who were terrified at the words of the God of Israel collected to me about this great wrong. And I sat in consternation until the evening sacrifice. But when the evening sacrifice was offered, I rose from my depression with my robe and cloak torn, and knelt on my knees, and spread my hands to my ever-living God, and exclaimed, My God, I blush and am ashamed to raise my face before you. For our passions increase on our head, and our sins are piled up to the skies. From the times of our fathers we have been in great sin to this day, and for our faults we, our kings and priests, have been given to the hands of the kings of the peoples, to ruin, to shame, and to degradation, and a blushing face as we now are. But now, when a little momentary kindness has come from our ever-living God for a portion of us to escape, and to give us a nail in this sacred place, that our God may enlighten our eyes, and grant us a little revival in our bondage. For we are slaves, but our God has not forsaken us in our slavery, but has extended mercy to us before the king of the Persians, to grant us a revival, and to raise the house of our God, and to repair its ashes, and has given us a fence for Judah in Jerusalem. Then now, what can be said to our God after this, when we abandon your commands, which you commanded by the means of your servants the preachers, saying, The land which you are going to possess is a defiled country from the defilements of the people of the country, and from their depravities with which they have filled it from place to place in corrupting themselves. Consequently, give not your sons to their daughters, nor your daughters to their sons, and never seek their peace or prosperity forever, so that you may be strong and eat the produce of the country, and transmit it to your children forever. And after all that has come upon us for our bad practices and for our great offenses, although you, our God, have punished us less than our sins, and given us an escape like this, we again break your commands and marry with these depraved people. Be not angry with us to the extreme, lest no portion should escape, ever-living God of Israel. You are righteous, for we a remnant have escaped as today. Look, we are before you in our guilt, for none can stand up before you about this. Chapter 10. And when Ezra was praying, and confessed himself in tears, and had flung himself down before the house of God, a very great crowd of men, women, and children from all Israel collected to him, and they wept with much weeping. And Shechaniah ben Jechiel, one of the sons of Aulam, addressed, and said to Ezra, We have done wrong to our God, when we turned to marry women from the peoples of the country. Yet there is hope for Israel over this. So now let us make an agreement with our God to expel all the women and the children born of them, according to the advice of my Lord, and of those who tremble at the commands of our God. But let it be done according to law. Arise, for the affair is yours, and we will support you in its execution. Ezra consequently arose and swore the chief priests and Levites and all Israel to do according to this proposal, and they swore it. Then Ezra arose from before the house of God, and went to the residence of Jochanan ben Elishib, where he lodged. He ate neither bread nor drank water, for he was grieved at the great wrong. But they made a proclamation in Judah and Jerusalem to all the sons of the transportation to assemble at Jerusalem, and that everyone who did not come at the third day, as advised by the chiefs and judges, all his property should be forfeited, and himself excluded from the great assembly. The whole of the officers of Judah and Benjamin, therefore, collected at Jerusalem on the third day, which was the 20th of the 9th month. And all the people who sat in the square of the house of God were trembling about the business, and for the reins. Then Ezra the priest arose, and said to them, You are guilty, and have married foreign women to add to the faults of Israel. But now confess it to the ever-living God of your fathers, and do what will please him, and separate yourselves from the peoples of the country, and from the wives you have married. All the assembly thereupon answered, and said with a loud voice, Let it be done as you have said to us. The people are very wet, and it is the rainy season, and we are not able to stand outside, and the business cannot be settled in a day or two, for we are many who have erred in this thing. Let our chiefs now be appointed by all the public, and let anyone in our towns who have married strange women go to them at appointed times, and the magistrates of every village, and the judges, until the hot anger of our God about this matter is turned from us. However, Jonathan ben Ashal and Jesiah ben Tikna stood up against this, and Meshullam and Shabthai the Levite supported them. The sons of the transportation effected it nevertheless, and they selected, with Ezra the priest, princes, heads of families of their ancestors, and appointed all of them to sit on the first day of the 10th month to examine into the business. And they finished about all the men who had married foreign women by the first day of the first month. They also found some among the sons of the priests who had married foreign women, Jeshua ben Josadak, and his brother Maaseiah, and Eleazar, and Jarib, and Gedaliah, but they undertook to divorce their wives, and offer a sin offering of the flock for their sin. And from the Beni Amir Hanani, and Zebediah, and from the Beni Karim, Maaseiah, and Eliah, and Shemaiah, Ichizal, and Uzziah, and from the Beni Fashkur, Alzoani, Maaseiah, Ishmael, Nethanel, Jozabad, and Elisha. And from the Levites, Jozabad, Shimei, and Kaliah, surnamed the dwarf, Pethiah, Judah, and Eleazar. And from the singers, Eliashib. And from the doorkeepers, Shallum, and Telem, and Uri. From the Beni of Parosh, Raniah, and Isaiah, and Malchiah, and Benaiah. And from the Beni Elam, Mattaniah, Zechariah, Eliah, and of the Beni Zattu, Elianai, Eliashib, Mattaniah, and Jeremoth, and Zabad, and Aziza. And of the Beni Babai, Jehohanan, Hananiah, Zabbai, Athli. And from the Beni Meshullam, Malach, and Abdiah, Jashub, and Shaul, and Ramoth. From the Beni Pathath Moab, Adnah, and Calab, Benaiah, Messiah, Mattaniah, Bozalal, and Bini, and Manasseh. And of the Beni Harum, Eleazar, Ishiah, Malchiah, Shemaiah, Shimeon, Benjamin, Maluk, Shemariah. Of the Beni Hashum, Matnai, Matata, Zabad, Eliphalet, Jeremiah, Manasseh, Shemai. Of the Beni Bani, Madai, Amram, and Awel, Benaiah, Bedaiah, Kaluhai. Vaniah, Meremoth, Eliashib, Matariah, Mattanai, and Jasu. And Bani, and Bini, Shenai, and Shelemiah, and Nathan, and Adiah, Machnadabai, Shashai, Sharai, Azarel, and Shelemiah, Shemariah, Shallum, Amariah, Joseph. Of the Beni Nebo, Jebel, Mattathiah, Zabad, Zebina, Edo, and Joel, Benaiah. All these had married foreign women, and some of these wives had borne children. The end of chapters 6 through 10, and the end of the Book of Ezra. Recording by Mark Penfold.